Hello, everybody. It's Holger Mueller here from Constellation Research, welcoming my colleague, dear friend, fellow curmudgeon, fellow conference attendee who makes conferences very well attended, Jon. Welcome, Jon. How are you?
Good, man. It wouldn't be a conference without a nice argument with Holger on the ground. So
Hey,
I think we
we have
made it
to make
happen
it
again.
interesting. We have to make it interesting. Good to see you,
Absolutely.
Jon. Back-to-back events in Las Vegas. We're going backwards. We're going to talk about Workday Rising first, which just concluded this week. You made it home yet?
Yeah, I'm back in the Bat Cave, but I still don't know what's going on. My Las Vegas residency is still lingering, but I'm trying to make sense of what happened, Holger. I'm trying to make sense of everything we learned. So
I thought you would say your throat is scratchy and your nose is stuffed a little bit.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's the usual guaranteed, no matter what the show is, the guaranteed Las Vegas souvenir that we get, right? So easier for me to go back to San Diego. Questions, of course, what do we get? What we definitely can get, I think Carl Eschenbach, as a first-time CEO, did a pretty good job, right?
Yeah, he did. I felt like he warmed up as the show went along, because the first kind of pre-conference keynote felt to me a little bit getting into a rhythm, but then after that was good, and then by the final exec Q&A session we had with him with analysts, he was like firing on all cylinders. He was ready to go. So I was actually really impressed. And we can get to that part of the story with the question that I raised with him, but it was cool to see him jump in the fray with like the kind of answers that like I would have thought a more cautious CEO would not have gotten into. So that showed me that he's feeling it a little bit, and that he, and that's, listen, you got to respect that, because Aneel Bhusri's shadow like looms large over whoever was going to take over that role. Yep. And for him to start making it his own, I think is good for him and good for Workday. So
right, I totally agree with you. And I thought Aneel was retired, but he was in 2 keynotes, right? So
well, I
don't know how retirement looks like, right?
He has insisted that he's still going to remain active, especially on the product and vision side. And I think Aneel is someone who I believe has spent a lot of time looking at the impact of AI, which he said on more than one occasion in different thing is bigger than cloud, which is kind of a big deal for him to say that, because you have to remember that cloud was really the forming principle behind why Workday was created in the first place, after PeopleSoft, right, was to take advantage of cloud and SaaS architectures. And so this is a big thing for him to say that. And so it's hard with retirement, but my interpretation of what he's doing is he wants to pick his spots and not have the kind of travel schedule that CEOs have, but he wants to have impact on product thinking, because he's aware that the AI quote unquote threat is enough to like pay attention to, and to make sure that they're capitalizing on it, but also not getting taken under by it. So I feel like that's got a little bit of his attention, and so that's why he's still engaged, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, definitely engaged on product side, and absolutely right. He said he's probably the CEO at the time who said the most that AI has a massive impact from everybody in enterprise software. I mean, nobody's saying it's nothing, right? Let's wait and see. But he definitely is the one who said it most drastically, rapidly. Right? So
yeah,
even more interesting, like where Workday is on AI. But I don't know how you want to structure it. You're the structured journalist. I'm the
the structured journalist.
Tell me how we want to talk about what before I jump the gun here.
Yeah. So to me, like, what I think is interesting, so I'll ask you this, is, and I think I know one of your answers, but if you don't, then I'll prompt you later. But what were one or two of your sort of burning questions heading into Rising, and did you get them answered?
Yeah, so the first burning question was, if you compare conference to conference first, right? And last year at Rising, there was very, very little product being shown. So to me, it was like, what's going on with Workday? Have they forgotten? I mean, everybody had a slowdown after COVID, where there was lots of challenges building stuff. I mean, I had the conversation, talked to many of the chief product officers, and they said, look, it's hard because we thought COVID would be over, and you always start something new typically in product development, which I've been part of many times. You bring everybody in one place for 1 week, for 2 weeks, everybody has to sign in blood, and then you get your marching orders. All that wasn't possible. So no major things came across the stack from the cloud vendors, from the PaaS vendors, from the SaaS vendors, right? So it was not so much last year, which wasn't so bad, but I was really surprised positively how much relatively Workday in the core product announced and said to be doing. So that was a positive surprise. The big question, of course, all along is what is happening with what's in everybody's mind is on the AI side. I think they were a little more confused. It needs a little more illumination, pun intended.
Ouch.
So
wait. So the Illuminate announcement didn't grab you then?
No, I think it's great to have a new name, an umbrella. I think they need something like new energy umbrella on this, because I've been talking about this now since 1.5 years, right? Since the Innovation Summit became the AI Summit. And I think the approaches keep changing. And yes, the technology keeps changing, right? Which was clearly, we don't touch customer data. It's a federated approach and so on, which was the 1.5 year position, to something more closer to the cloud. And we'll talk about customers in the cloud right now. And then they had this partnership with Salesforce, which, yes, by the way, sidebar for a second, right? Probably one of the best CEO to CEO conversations, these partner things, was for anybody watching this, go back to the community keynote and see Carl Eschenbach speaking to Mark Benioff.
Yeah, Benny. Phil Wainwright said that on Diginomica that Benioff video bombed the keynote, so that's pretty entertaining.
Yeah. But it was,
and by the way, Benioff was in the middle of Dreamforce, so that's kind of a big deal. Like Benioff's Dreamforce schedule is pretty well accounted for, so the fact that he went on there, I would pay attention to that.
Yeah, shows a lot of closeness, and then they had that combined announcement. Anil Bush reconfessing his admiration to what Salesforce has done and so on multiple times, right? So there's a lot of mutual respect, esteem, friendship, whatever between these.
And when you think about it, Holger, it kind of makes sense too, because we're going to do a taping on Oracle as well, but there were similar types of partnerships announced there. And when you think about it from a user experience standpoint, with sort of imagining more sort of AI-based queries, it kind of ups the ante in terms of, like, if a user asks the system to go do something for me or go pull a piece of information for me, the user doesn't want to hear back, oh, sorry, I can only give you part of that information because part of it's in Workday and part of it's in Salesforce. The user doesn't give a crap about that. The user's trying to get something done. And so if these so-called agents, and I have some problems with how this term is being so indiscriminately used, but that's another conversation. If these so-called agents can't talk to each other, especially amongst, like, when you have a software that's frequently used by your fellow customer, like, that's going to be a non-starter. And so it makes sense that these partnerships are emerging.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The partnerships make sense. It was also interesting for me from the platform side that it was about Workday putting data into the data cloud for making things happening there. I have not been to Dreamforce, right? And I haven't heard if there's any data out of Workday showing up in the Dreamforce agent frenzy, which we can tackle another time in a third video if you want. Taping, right, as you'd like to say, like a digital taping. I think the partnership makes sense. Lots of partnerships happening with Workday, right? Remember the summer of bromance, whatever, with Larry and Mark talking about things. Nothing really happened afterwards, right? We'll see what happens in this partnership. And I think back to the AI piece, the confusion between the original approach, the new capabilities, the Salesforce approach, and then putting Illuminate over it. I mean, even talked to colleagues who went to the show floor, right? There's always the validation for us, go to the show floor. Then hopefully people don't see your lanyard because they're all media trained. Don't talk to analysts.
Exactly.
But you can see still on the signage and so on. I think the Illuminate thing isn't like more than 2 or 3 weeks old before it came up, right? And it's a classic marketing move to put an umbrella term about everything. I think what they got right was the 3 steps of, I forgot, like aid, augment, and then transform. I think that showed up consistently. That was good, but that's the top level part of it. And then
I think the second step might have been accelerate, but it was the same concept.
Yeah.
So, right. And I'm not sure how much acceleration has happened just yet, though I did put a roadmap slide in one of my pieces. But
yes.
But one thing I did want to mention to you, because this relates to the sort of the burning question that I had going into the conference, which had to do with, I wanted to drill in a little bit on handling of customer data and some of the details within AI systems, because that's, customers really want to get under the hood how this stuff is working. And so their expectation this fall is that vendors disclose a lot more details about how all of this works. And so I went in, my burning question for both the Workday and the Oracle shows was to get more about that. And one thing I picked up on, and I think it will be interesting to see if this is the case, is that what Workday tends to do is they tend to be very, very deliberate and then quote unquote accelerate. And it will be interesting to see if that happens this time, because for years I said Workday needs a platform, an app extension scenario. And finally, they come out with Extend, which I felt took them way too long. But when they did, they did. And now they have 2,000 apps in that platform. They have plenty of customers talking about building apps on the platform. So essentially, they kind of accelerated. So you had, they had Target building apps. I went to presentations of customers building apps, and it was cool to hear about that. And I guess they're saying that 40% of the apps built on Extend are AI enabled in some form. Now that's probably mostly not generative AI, but same concepts using those technologies. I'll be interested to see if Workday has the same thing going with generative AI, where they start to really accelerate on the distribution of functionality, because they've been concentrating more on the architecture side. Because even since this spring, when we gathered for the Analyst Innovation Summit, they've changed some of the architecture in the sense that, because I wanted to look at customer data movement, and what we found out from Shane Luke and others is they're one of the few enterprise software vendors that's actually built their own LLMs, so large language models. So they're really mostly using the hyperscaler LLMs, et cetera, for their own experiments, not so much for customer data movement. So that solves a lot of the problem of what you do with customer data in terms of things like log files and other things that are kind of the fine print of how LLMs operate, not just how they're trained, but what happens to all the interacting data and everything else. Well, if Workday controls all of that for customers, that's a big step for them. And so my sense is that while they might announce Illuminate as this umbrella, I think what they were really working on is the plumbing. And now we have to see if they can now deliver the functionality on top of that. And so I think that's kind of what people like you are waiting for. And we're going to have to, I think, kick the can down the road for another 6 months or year to really assess that. So
that's probably a fair assessment. And a good point that you mentioned that build their own LLMs. We didn't hear any much about these LLMs anymore, right? The Illuminate LLM. And there's a need for this, right? Because one of the big innovations, let's say, even I think Ellie Fisher is her name, right? The lady who does UX since many, many years. I said we haven't done much at the Workday UX since a long time. This is going to be the most radical thing. And moving to conversational is a pretty radical thing, because collapses the whole menu and the structure. And conversational is much more in tune with younger generations who don't want to talk to people or navigate things. So, but that has to be a pretty big LLM, which knows everything that happens alone inside of Workday, right? So, and where will you run this? How will you run this? How will it be built? How will it be extended? I mean, the good news of last year was that the Workday Extend, which is a big success story, we should talk about this for a moment, definitely a key takeaway, no surprising actually, but is the place to build your AI apps. I saw some between the sessions of Shane Luke and Jay Witchakowski, sorry for butchering his name, the GMs of the respective areas or VPs or whatever they are. There's some platform positioning between the two going on, because we didn't see like demos in Extend, like how you build your AI app, right? And that is another hint for us that it's unclear what happens below. As you know, in the Q&A with the executives, I asked Shane, like, pick one from your roadmap. Kudos for putting a roadmap. How would you build it? And collectively, the assessment was in the analyst community, well, he didn't really answer it. So I think they may not know yet, and there might be some shifts in the underlying technology. Which
they did say at one point that customers will be able to do that via quote unquote gateway, which is API repositories and stuff. But like you said, there weren't a lot of details around how that would work specifically. And this is the thing one of the big things I keep talking with vendors about is that the customers do want these details now. With AI, I think more than any other technology I've seen, customers really want to understand how it works. It's not enough for them to know, oh, this helps you to do something. They need to know exactly what went into it. They need to know how the AI came to the decision it came to. They need to know where the data was sourced, and they need to know the architecture that drove all of that and the building blocks, like you said, that they can use to build their own applications. So these details really matter. And I think one of the problems that I've had this fall, and I'm not surprised that I'm having it because I was expecting it, is vendors are still trying to sell AI, and I don't think they need to do that. I think customers are pretty bought in that that this is an imperative. They at least need to evaluate it carefully. So I keep telling vendors, stop selling it and start showing us how it's going to work.
That's a great point, right? So, there's a chicken and egg problem, right? So some of the side things was we haven't looked at Workday this week. We haven't looked at AI. We're not adopting it. We're not using it. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg problem, because less the customers are doing it, the more the vendors will be pushing it and selling it. And at the same time, they're not ready to
totally. I get that, but the reason customers aren't using it is not because they're not interested in evaluating it. Exactly. It's because they have concerns of various kinds, or they have organizational buy-in questions, or they want to understand the business benefits better, or they're scared of the stories they've read about meltdowns with chatbots and stuff like that from Chat GPT variety. And look,
around this, yeah.
So I do believe that there is a need to earn trust, but that's different than selling it constantly. That's sort of my problem. So for example, on the trust side, what I've said is that enterprise vendors are trying to say two things. They're trying to say, what you've heard about AI that scares you is different in an enterprise context, because this is not primarily about job loss. It's about like you used that word, making workers' lives better, more effective, arguably more fulfilling, though we don't always talk about that in the right way. And that we're going to do that. How? Because we're going to have a better architecture that delivers more accurate results. And part of that is going to be because those models are trained on your data, which is a big part of Workday's message. It's not only that they're going to go into the prompt in a contextual way, which is done via a technology called RAG, but also that a lot of the smaller models that Workday has built, which they have more than 7,000 now, they can deploy on customers and they can fine tune to the customer. And so what they're trying to say is that all this crazy stuff you heard, well, this is going to be better. And so I understand why they're talking about that, and that all makes sense. I like you said, I just feel like there's a need for a little more details from all of these vendors, not just Workday, around how does this really work for customers. And so anyway, I just have a difference of opinion with vendors about that. It's nothing personal to Workday.
Sure. No, good point. All the vendors are still kind of figuring it out, right? One thing which is the tip of the iceberg, is the question how do you charge for it, right? And pretty much everybody is still in let's make it free. And you can only make something free if it's not really creating massive value, because you can't afford as a vendor.
Well, that depends a little bit. There's that. I don't know how many vendors we want to pick by name, but I would say, I could think of Salesforce, Microsoft, and SAP as vendors that are looking a little more to monetize their offerings around that. I would cite Workday and Oracle as a couple that are more focused on not charging, but quote unquote delighting customers with embedded AI functionality. But the one thing I would say, even though I'm more of a fan of the latter, because I think when you embed AI in functions, I don't think ultimately you are going to be able to charge for it if you fast forward 5 years from now. So I don't really believe in charging for copilots, because I don't think we're going to be it's just going to be how software is. So in the long run, I think that's the winning model. But I will concede that a lot of the price points aren't settled yet, because I don't think any of these vendors know exactly how much it's going to cost. Because this is turning out to be a very expensive technology, and vendors are trying to figure out how to not use large language models when they don't need to, and use smaller models more. And they're trying to figure out, I hope the hyperscalers don't jack up their costs. I hope NVIDIA doesn't jack up their costs. No one knows exactly how much all this is going to cost to deliver. So
that's why I think Carl's answer was pretty good, right? He said, I'm not going to charge for it for now, but I'm not reserving the right to charge for it at some point, right? But on the flip side, right, we don't have to mention the vendors, but the one who said for $2 per agent invocation, then I must be pretty sure that I'm creating value here, right? And the two will be discounted and so on, right? But
I personally like the model of not charging for the embedded stuff, but then saying, if we can come to you, dear customer, with transformative value in an add-on capacity, then we're going to charge for that. If I like that model, but I don't know how it's going to shake out. I just know that the more barriers you put in front of customers to sample and get going, the worse it's going to be for you, because one of the really big takeaways with AI is that pilots really don't work very well, because the problem is that so much of this is about seeing what happens on your data. You can try it on different data, but you ultimately really have to try it at some level of scale on your own live data. And so what works a lot better than pilots is actually turning something on and starting to use it, even if it's like a pretty conservative approach, like, okay, let it write some emails for people that are asking about benefits information or accounts payable information, or, start a little bit more careful as far as things that aren't like super high stakes inside your organization. But I think you have to start in order to see what it's like. I don't think like, oh, let's do this small pilot or whatever. That doesn't work for AI. So.
Or you have to be big, like conversational UX only makes sense if you can get everything and not like a subset or the most 20 popular transactions can be found, right? Because that's frustrating, because you try it, oh, it's going to be there, it's not going to be there. And then it's kind of like the home assistants like an Alexa and Google Home, where the user has to know what you can ask and what you can't ask. And you shouldn't ask, right? They have a huge knowledge transfer capability where the weekly email tells you what you could try, but who gets the connection between the weekly email to that, right? So the universal conversational UX has to be holistic for that application, right? Or at least prompt me to the menu if it can't do the business by voice, right?
So can we get back to one thing, because I know we're going to have to wrap and get onto Oracle, but there's a couple things that I wanted to get to, and one of them is your ongoing, you have the whole like, I'll be sitting and oftentimes you're to one side of me and I'll be like, oh, Holger has a question. I'm like, I think Holger is going to ask about the public cloud again. And sure enough, Holger asked about the public cloud again. So I'm kind of curious, like, I know some of this we were still working on approvals as far as what numbers we can share, but we did talk about this in our last.
I got the number.
Okay. So can you talk about that and why you've been pressing that?
Yeah, so I'm pressing very much on the public cloud because, in my view, we can fill a whole thing about small and large models and small and big AI, right? I'm staunchly in the camp of bigger AI because, we're trying to augment and work like a human, right? So, and we know everything that's going on, the weather outside, what our sports team is doing, what's happening in politics, right? And it affects our decision-making, right? And if you want to get this right in business application, if you want to mimic the human, augment the human, be better than a human or be like a human, you better know these things, right? Because how can you even in a fair conversation have limited information from the outside? Now, tons of questions on data privacy, tons of questions on cost, on validity, on hallucination, all of that granted. But if you can make the larger model and if you can pay for the larger model, then the larger model will be the smaller model. Size matters, in my view, under these conditions. And that's why it matters so much that you have to be in the public cloud. You cannot be on instances where you do something like for customers in a hosted way, like much of the Workday private cloud, whatever they call it now these days is, and you have to scale to it, right? I had a super interesting side conversation with the CTO of Jim Stratton and say, like, can you turn on all these conversational things for like 100,000, 10,000, I think I said, to people company, while you're closing the books and while you're running payroll, right? Which are the two peaks which happen in a Workday instance. And you probably can't run them at the same time, which would be a question.
So an example would be like if there's a surge in so-called inference requests, which actually consume a fair amount of energy to answer, like from a cloud bandwidth standpoint. And so that would be an example where you can't easily plan for that. You don't know, like you can plan for closing your books. You can't plan for when you're going to get a surge in interaction with the system.
Right.
And so I think what you're trying to point out is that in a private cloud context, that's really difficult to manage at scale. Exactly. And so
this is why it's so important that vendors
do you think Workday agrees with you on that, and have they made progress?
I think so, right? Because the previously disclosed number was 200 customers using AWS, and nobody really said Google. Google is a partner. And now the number was 700 and then 900 on AWS and Google, not sure if implementing or live.
Which is more than which, by the way, is more than triple from the spring. So that's a pretty significant growth.
Dramatic increase. So
that's almost 10% of the customer base.
Exactly. So, more than 10%. Right, because it's 5,500 HCM, 2,000.
Oh, right, yeah, good point. Right,
overlap, right? So then this is like 20% of the customer base, and then jump from zero to nothing, right? To take that SAP for cloud migration thing as an example, right? Which is a different story, of course, for many reasons. But I think it implicitly, tacitly shows that Workday knows they have to move to public cloud, right? Those numbers don't happen overnight. Even so, again, back to the conversation with Stratton, they can put a tier in front of it, which can scale, but it has to be a customer-dedicated tier. It's not a good return on investment. I think to do really cloud in a scalable way, you need to use a spare capacity, the elasticity, both from an architectural side and from a commercial side, to use these things, right? So this is why looking at the public cloud numbers is really, really important again. And I mean, congrats on these numbers, which is massive progress. Yeah, which makes, of course, development more harder because you have to run it in both instances, even the same environment. It's not going to be the same environment where in one thing you just ramp up and down on AWS or Google Cloud to have more mid-tiers, and the other which goes automatically, right? And on the other side, you have to really make sure somebody has provisioned that instance, that hardware is there, you paid for it, it's in there, right? So very, very different.
So I want to challenge you I want to challenge you on one point, because I wrote 3 AI articles on Workday last week, and so I dug into a lot of this, and I think I would definitely agree with you on your public cloud theories on why this matters going forward, and I think that sort of the elasticity of demand around AI is a really really good argument. But what I will say is that when Workday looks at LLMs and their capabilities, they're not so much about like, oh, you kind of spoke to more generalization features, which is, oh, you know, an LLM, like a chat GPT type LLM, it's been trained on the whole internet. So it can tell me if I wanted to like issue like Workday's benefits policies in a form of a Shakespearean sonnet, it can do that. But why do you need that? Or, you know, if Workday users don't need recipes for, I don't know, a peanut butter fudge, you know, so that part of it doesn't really help. But the other things that LLMs are really good at.
Making me hungry.
Yeah, but the other things that LLMs are really good at are interactions. They support a much more sophisticated ability to chat. And the reason that's important is because the way we communicate like as humans requires some sophistication, right? Because I might use one word that's synonymous with another word, and if I have a rudimentary bot, it's not going to understand my request. And so my understanding of when Workday wants to employ LLMs is more for that reason, not for the general knowledge, but for that's more sophisticated chat, because that's going to be very important for the user interactions. But when it comes to pulling data, they really want to use smaller models for that are tuned to the customer and much more specific, for a couple reasons: for better results and also for affordability, because you can't run everything on LLMs, Holger. You just can't do it. They're too expensive. They consume too much energy, and they make you look really terrible with your ESG commitments that you have to walk back, which most big tech companies are doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, all very good points. What you should not forget is like you have to run all this on data, and one of the problems is that you must have a lake house, that's the name of it, where all the data, third-party data, other systems data, right? There was one slide in one of the keynotes where they had third-party systems data showing up, right, which was super interesting to see how they're going to do this, orchestrate as a tool and so on. It's going to be interesting, but you don't want to be in the Microsoft Copilot trap. Right? If you
for sure,
models, right?
But sure. For example, though, like one of the things that Workday has done, and I think they're going to issue a white paper on this soon, is how they've trained on data on large models and then converted them over time into smaller models. There's a specific name for that. It's a PEFT.
Condensation, vectorization, something.
So
that is all good.
And also model distillation and stuff like that. I'm not totally disagreeing with you, because I do agree that there's a big data, big tech component to AI that's never going to go away. I'm just saying that vendors have a lot of incentive to learn how to use smaller models when they can get away with it. That's all I'm saying.
When they can get away with it, I'm worried that people who do the smaller models don't really have the full cloud access. Right? And we have to revisit this anyway from what Salesforce has done this week, not to mention the elephant in the room here.
Yeah. Well, we're going to find out, but I'm more optimistic, I think, about smaller models than you are, but we shall see.
Yeah, we shall see. To be continued, right? The other important thing, I would be damned if not mention it, right? I'm one of the few analysts who still cares about payroll, a new different payroll strategy, right? We have a global payroll connect, a very nice user interface, partner-based. No further detail on the German payroll, which was once upon a time committed. These things can happen. It's not abandoned, it's just delayed. We'll see how that will pan out. I think Workday is hoping that the partnership with Strada, which uses SAP under the hoods, will be working for them the same way how it used to be working for them with the partnership with ADP. If you remember, like in the early 2000s,
Yep.
Workday customers were saying going to the cloud was brand new, was risky enough for that. Let's keep at least our payroll in ADP and we'll be safe, right? So the same thing I can see working in the 2020s, 20 years later in Germany, we're saying, all right, we'll use them to Workday, but we still use the SAP payroll, which maybe Strada's magically even taking in our customized way and keeping it, and we're offloading this. And maybe we're off to S4HANA for the rest of our portfolio because we don't need to run this old ECC payroll anymore. So it's going to be interesting how that turns out, right? And there, my view, I'm still in the point, if you have the large enterprise quest that Workday has with SAP and Oracle, I mean, everybody's lucky that SAP is rebuilding their payroll and don't have support for all the 56 countries in something modern cloud-based, but the time will come. So you're living on borrowed time as Oracle and SAP not having that. So it's going to be
indeed. That's a story to watch. And just a couple very quick things that we didn't get to that I'll mention that I've written about. One is Workday's continued emphasis on financials, 2,000 plus customers. And there was some really good content at the show around how to think about finance transformation. And I've said before that I don't like sometimes the emphasis on productivity and AI. There's a really good thing around collaboration and why CFOs at their core need to learn how to collaborate better if they want to take advantage of AI. So that was a great conversation at Workday Rising this year. And then, of course, more emphasis on adaptive planning to try to really get that stickier. And I heard some good things from customers, but that's still something that's kind of a work in progress. Prism Analytics, I keep hearing from customers they love it. Workday should probably make more noise about it. And finally, I wrote a controversial fun piece around a Workday customer that plans to rip out Workday and Salesforce in favor of building its own ERP and CRM with AI. I wrote kind of why I thought that was kind of a ludicrous story, but in fairness to the customer, go knock yourself out and try to do that. I explained kind of why I think that's problematic and why that won't like carry over to most customers. But look, some customers historically have built, some enterprises have built their own tech stacks from the ground up, so it can be done. It's a question of how you want to differentiate in the modern world, but it opens up a really interesting conversation on to what extent are transactional systems going to be commodities, which really has been going on for a long time, but AI just accelerates that problem and challenge. So all vendors, including Workday, are facing that, but they're well aware of that issue. So that'll be a really interesting story to follow. And, there's a great discussion going on LinkedIn right now about that with a lot of people firing off. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and let's keep in mind, right, Klarna, Swedish company, I say it here, very simple business model. They're not manufacturing anything. They don't have any products in stock. So if a company...
Oh, and they're laying off 50% of their workforce as well. So, it's, whether...
But supposedly because of the quality of the customer service agent, right? So...
supposedly we
shall. So if
shall.
I buy something with Klarna financing it and have to change my bank account or I'm behind on payments, it might be even better to have that conversation with AI than a human who's saying, "You idiot, Holger, you can't pay the $50 for the TV you bought and finance for Klarna," right? So ideal setup for that because the value chain of the company is so simple relatively. They will of course argue it's very complex, but it's highly proprietary from a risk management perspective. So we'll see how that goes. Right?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch. If they can build a next generation tech stack, I'll be the first to shake their hands. Right. I'm not so sure they should try rebuilding ERP. And for example, I asked in my article, are they going to be rebuilding global payroll and benefits? I'm not so sure that's really where you should spend your time, even with the help of AI. But anyhow, it's a fun conversation, and it's one that provokes the question of the future of software, and I think it's a good question. So it's a good question.
You talk to so many customers at these shows, right? Many of the articles you can read on diginomica are all about the customer doing something with the vendor, in this case Workday. What was the one that was most exciting to you at the show that you can mention or preview potentially if it's not out yet? It's going to come.
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm going to be writing about a couple. Data Stacks was really interesting. I interviewed the CAO, which is the Chief Accounting Officer, and I alluded to this a little bit already, but it was really interesting to talk with him about the evolution of finance and to what extent could he automate certain things with AI, what the limits of that would be, but also just like getting his gut check on everything Workday is doing, and especially around the sort of concept of how CFOs need to evolve. And it was interesting to hear him talk about like how they use a lot of the same language around becoming, like Workday's thing is around shifting from becoming a steward to an advisor to kind of a partner with the business, and that's the same
Mhm.
language that he uses.
Yes.
But I found that really refreshing because with all the technology like that you have, if you apply it to a bad organizational structure and bad leadership, it's not going to be a good experience. I don't care what kind of tech it is. And so it was good to hear from a customer that's really actively using AI, but also trying to put it into like a more kind of a humanized framework of like, this is where we want to go as a company. These are our values. And so, you get that from customers. And I think in general, like the customers that I heard from at the show, like were all really interested in the overall tech direction they were hearing, but they all have real world problems that make things more difficult. I thought of you talking with another customer that I talked to on the last day that was more HCM oriented because we were talking about Skills Cloud and Skills Ontology, which I'm a huge fan of, but you're always saying, well, how are we going to keep that thing updated? And it was great to ask that question. And I was like a Holger in my ear asking the customer, like,
Oh my God.
how are we going to keep this
Yeah.
updated? And hearing the customer saying, that is a challenge, right? And that AI and all this stuff and self-service, updating of skills can help. But like, it's really good to hear that from customers that they're bought in, but that also that it's just not as easy to get there as you hear on the slide decks. And so that's kind of why we go looking for these stories, because we really want to understand what the real world challenges are, because there's too much of this before and after of like you sprinkle this next gen stuff on there and then everything works out. But that's not what we were hearing for customers. They like the direction, but applying it is a whole different story.
Yes. Yeah. And let's hope that it works this time, because if skills work in a company, everything is much better. I had a good conversation with the gentleman on Cornell University. Got the geographic update again, where it is not as cold as Syracuse. I'm not familiar with the West Coast, East Coast there. First higher education customer, I didn't know that. And basically plugging along and putting more and more Workday into place. Huge footprint, 10 people keeping this running at Cornell, which is an interesting number, doing this internally. Big Extend customer as well. And maybe we haven't highlighted Extend enough, right? So Extend is really the success product, right? Fastest growing product, I believe Carl was saying. No surprise, because Workday went from like 10 years ago, you couldn't extend anything, couldn't put it in a field, nothing. Then came extensible objects, if for everybody who's long enough here to remember. And now you can build whatever you need, whatever you like, which is super important, because like one takeaway message was very clear here, something we heard from other vendors too. Workday will not build everything themselves, right? The 3X message, which you haven't mentioned, customers will own their automation destiny using Extend and Enterprise Application Platform, as called, and then of course partners. And in those industry accelerators, which we haven't talked about either, to get Workday go live faster, there could be code and code assets and versioning assets for these partners in there, which I think is a very, very interesting approach to get these partners to build automation, which is missing in the core Workday capabilities, and which will never see the light potentially in any of these releases.
Yeah, for sure. And in the conversation I had with HPE around HCM, it was the same stuff. And I think the thing that I found encouraging was, like you said, it's a skills journey, but they talked about how they don't have to do degree-based hiring anymore because of the progress that they've made. And I love to hear stuff like that, because like that's when we start moving out of these rule-based hiring scenarios that are just such a bad example of automation that companies got forced into because of the amount of applicants they get, but it's not a savvy way to hire employees. And it's cool to hear about things like how the mentoring is taking off as a result of some of the recommendations on, intelligent recommendations. So I love to hear stuff like that. I think, the problem that I still run into is that I don't know about you, but I still don't hear companies talking about how they're bringing in better talent with these tools. I'm hearing more about improving the internal dynamics. I'm not hearing as much around how you get talent in the door that your competitors don't have access to and stuff like that. So I don't know. I just haven't heard those stories. I hope I hear more of them.
And if you ask the analysts in that space, right, the reason is that we have not used rethought the process, how it should be done, right? So we're still in the running the treadmill of like job posts, done by AI, find the candidate.
AI interviews your candidates for you.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of like always looking who's the best person on the job. Yeah.
Right.
Like I have my people working here. First of all, I should be fair to my people in the company and say, I should do a mini reorg, right? Jon would be better at what Holger is doing. Holger better at what Jon doing. No, don't worry, it's not going to happen.
Oh no,
but yeah,
we're going to swap out.
Yeah, exactly. You swap not in terms of job enrichment, but
I'm not sure how that's going to go for Ray. It's going to be who wants to tell Ray the bad news or the good news. That's
the good
hilarious.
news, of course. The good news, of course. Finally, someone who can write, right?
Maybe for 24 hours. Oh my God, that's hilarious.
No, but so seeing your existing talent who could be better at doing a job, because you might lose people because I think nobody's ever going to see me that I'm better at the job. Then see what's outside, which could do a better job. That a manager can see, well, I like Jon, but if I can get Super Jon from out there, and he's so much better, and I can pick up the phone and call Super Jon. Super Jon's going to start next week. I'm going to find Jon Reed a new place in Constellation, right? Which he might be wanting to do anyway, right? And this gets very complicated very quickly, and then you add gig workers to it because you don't want to make every permanent positions. And this rethinking of the process, which cannibalizes the whole recruiting space. Yeah, because you don't need recruiters anymore. Because you need every manager sees who's the best person for the job all the time. Now, lots of questions, lots of ifs, but that's what infinite computing from the cloud could provide to you. Yeah.
Infinite computing, indeed. Hey, just real quick, we shouldn't neglect to mention HiredScore and Athena Karp, because she played a big role in the conference. And if you're interested in some of these topics, I do think what they're doing with HiredScore is pretty cool. But we didn't have a chance to get into it because, Holger, how much can you cover in one discussion?
Exactly. Not too much, obviously. Right? HiredScore, very interesting. The second last acquisition, they did a new acquisition on contract management.
Yes, indeed, a contract management acquisition, which I touched on in the financials piece, because obviously that so-called document intelligence is going to be really, really important to getting better AI and doing it more efficiently. So that's a big acquisition in a certain sense, and that's called Evisort, and that happened this week as well, but because it was such a busy show, we didn't even cover it on this discussion. So
sometimes one acquisition is the whole news of the show, right?
Indeed.
Not the case here. Perfect. Did we forget anything? Are we good to go?
Yeah, we're done.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jon. It's always fun to talk to you about the shows we attended. If you hear something that we missed that we should have talked about, especially if I wasn't right with something, please let me know. Tell Jon where he's right on. He loves that. No, just kidding. We all want to hear from you. Be social, be interactive. Don't be shy. Thanks for watching. Over and out. Thank you.